To give us an update on the program and other resources to support Australian SMEs, please welcome someone with over 30 years experience in design, engineering and manufacturing. He's the Executive Director of Industry Growth at the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, with the second largest business card you've ever seen. Put your hands together for David Chuter. Here he is, yes!
Cheers. Thanks everybody, and look, first of all, well done for attending this. I was here 2 years ago, and I think most of us were masked up at that point, all right, and struggling to work out how our businesses could survive. So it's a real privilege to be here today. First thing I'd like to do is have my presentation on the screen, if that's possible. If you don't ask, you don't get. That's what I always say. So for those of you that are here this morning, Brendan did a fantastic welcome to country. And it just always reminds me that it is about acknowledging our country. And when I think about the world I now live in and the world I've been in the last 30 years in manufacturing before I stepped into the world of government, we talk about innovation and we talk about really very much modern innovation. But we've got an awful lot to learn, and I think we are learning in terms of climate adaptability, in terms of farming techniques, in terms of culture and communication. We have a lot to learn from those that preceded us for tens of thousands of years. And so I think there's something we shouldn't forget when we do the welcome to country and the acknowledgement of country. All right. So you're all converted, so you're kind of an easy audience today because it's not always that you talk to people that are fans of manufacturing. But I just wanted to frame something for you, that manufacturing is far from dead in Australia. Sure, we've had some hits such as the end of the car industry, but I also attended a presentation this morning that said, had we been making cars at the start of COVID, there is no doubt we would have had an immediate structural collapse of an entire industry, as opposed to what ended up being a reasonably ordered exit from making vehicles, and allowing many of you companies who were participating in the automotive industry to find pathways beyond it. And so COVID might have been a much more difficult situation for the car industry. But as it stands today, when it comes to employment, manufacturing is still the 7th largest employer with just under 1 million people. Our challenge is how we attract the next generation. I have teenage kids. Can I convince them to work in manufacturing? Really hard. Could I convince them to go into things like design and development and maybe software and marketing related to manufacturing that is enabled by production? I think that's a much easier ask, and that's one of the topics I want to touch on later on. Because to me, when we come to shows like this, we get very wowed with the technology, the capital assets, what the facilities, the supply chains could look like. But fundamentally, those of you that own businesses, this is a people game. It will always be a people game, no matter how automated. And I think the challenge that we have are building the talent for the future and how to attract them into our industries. But we shouldn't forget that we are the 7th largest employer by industry today. When you jump forward to the proportion of gross domestic product, we are also the 6th largest producer. Now, I actually think it's a bit broader because where does the definition of manufacturing start and end? All right. You'll see sectors in here such as mining and construction, all right? Well, is some of that manufacturing? Probably. But this is based on the ABS definitions that businesses are registered under. And what you'll also see, under 6th, we're the 6th biggest size of industry in terms of billions of dollars. No surprises in Australia, which is the biggest industry. It remains the mining sector. However, and there's no doubt with the growth of the middle class in Asia, we're going to continue to see over many years a substantial investment in mining in Australia. We're also going to see opportunities for tourism, for education, and for food, which predominantly are the 4 primary sectors that allows us to have the quality of lifestyle we have here in Australia. But when I show you just a little bit of a forecast that just came out last week from one of the Oz Industry resource maps, what you'll see is that we're currently at a forecast peak in terms of the billions of dollars that our mining industry stands for that we export. And the challenge we have is that the pricing out in the market means the value of those exports may drop considerably. The reason I show this to you is not to worry you or alarm you, but I really do see, and I want to send a message to you that the government also sees, that manufacturing and high value added and complex manufacturing here in Australia is part of the solution, if not a major part of the solution, to keep growing our economy very quickly. And we need to find a way to move that from being the 6th or 7th largest employer to having a bigger share of what we do here in Australia. So just in terms of those snapshots, 6th biggest sector, 7th biggest for employment. But there's no doubt that the manufacturing conditions you all experienced are a little bit dependent based on your industry or your region, all right? People are doing it tougher in the regions in certain areas. People are doing it tougher in the cities and other areas for different reasons. There are some good signs though. The investment into manufacturing increased year on year compared to prior years. Now a little bit of that is a kickback through COVID, but you're the ones doing that investment, and that's why you're here, looking at the new opportunities where you can drive your business forward. And we've also seen, despite years of employment dropping in manufacturing, we're now seeing employment rising again, which is all a good sign as to why manufacturing matters. But there's no doubt that when I go out and travel to businesses, and before I came to this role, I ran a medium-sized business, and I saw all the challenges you're seeing, and particularly attracting and retaining skilled staff seems to be one of the biggest challenges many of you have. There's also no doubt that cost inputs are increasing, including the cost of employing people, but energy, raw materials, supply chains, and part of that is being driven by continued international supply chain disruptions. So most of us are now storing more goods here in Australia, a little bit of security stock, but our cash is potentially tied up in that, and that's cash that potentially we might have used otherwise on design, development, marketing, training, and new investment. And so I think that's why the investment is pent up, but we've got great opportunities here to come. We also know through some of the government publications, we have, since 2008, the proportion of medium-sized companies in the manufacturing sector has dropped by about 40%. And so when I talk about medium-sized companies, they are typically the ones that are more resilient, more able to adapt to change, more able to invest, have a greater hearing with a bank, potentially have a greater hearing with a government, have critical mass. We've seen a drop in the proportion, which means that we have a higher number by proportion of small businesses or under 20 employees. And a lot of our large companies are fantastic companies, but the proportion of those that are foreign owned, where we might not be doing the design and development here in Australia, for example, is also a factor of our industry. But I think they are a critical part of our industry. You've probably heard in the last week, and maybe even before that, a phrase called a future made in Australia. Now, I'm not going to comment on that from a government perspective. You've heard there will be an act that will go through Parliament. But I don't think any of you can doubt that over the last year, and certainly since the emergence of COVID, the language, the priorities around making things here in Australia, and for me, I'd like to see that is the broad spectrum of making things, from doing the design, doing the development, getting your supply chain, getting your logistics organized. It's the broad spread. It's not just production itself. It's the high value services. There is no doubt that there are huge opportunities for that. And there's also no doubt that you are hearing every day in the press where the government is focusing on these areas. And I want to share a bit of that with you. The other thing I want to touch on is that I do think, and COVID also exposed this, that the biggest opportunity SMEs have right now in Australia, you'll hear talk about skills, you'll hear talk about growth, you'll hear talk about productivity and energy and net zero. I actually think the opportunity the Australian companies have is the opportunity to create newness, uniqueness, and that's what I call innovation. All right, it's creating something new that you can sell to somebody or you can export, and that might be a service like a software platform enabled by your products. So I think what you're seeing now across a whole variety of programs the government is trying to stimulate is a greater focus on the innovation side of things. Notwithstanding, we also have a need to improve productivity in other areas. So you've probably heard of this thing called the National Reconstruction Fund. I'm going to touch on that shortly. But effectively, what we have in Australia now are a series of priority areas that have been called NRF. However, I like to call them as priority areas of the Australian economy. Now, you might sit there and say, well, look, I'm in the building industry, I'm in the construction, where do I fit? All right, I'm in the logistics sector, where do I fit within this? Why isn't my industry represented? Well, I see these industry sectors when I first saw them as kind of actually really important to where we're going in Australia. So value add in resources, critical minerals and metals for export, value add in agriculture, forestry and fishes, We have the opportunity to feed the world from Australia, but we need to mobilize in that space. So much of what you'll see in the agriculture industry is imported plant and equipment. And a capability opportunity for us is to design and develop some of the equipment and plant and so on that we could be more self-sufficient here in Australia. And that's a case that you'll see out here today with companies exactly in that space. Defense capability, renewables and low emission technologies, medical science. You may have heard there was an announcement about a medical science co-investment plan that came out earlier this week. It is one of the biggest areas that we can build that sovereign capability in addition to defense to make sure we are more capable and more resilient as and when another pandemic comes along. What I was particularly pleased to see this when I was back in industry was that there was also another sector called enabling capabilities. And these are defined as advanced manufacturing technologies, things like artificial intelligence, robotics, extending to things like digital twins, software platforms, and so on. These are some of the enabling capabilities that you'll see out here on the floor today. I think these are where the opportunities really sit for most SMEs. And it's also what you're hearing is that, as I touched on earlier, manufacturing is now defined as a capability across the value chain. So when we talk about making things, to me, it's a broader perspective. It's not just the production element. And so if you're looking for talents and skills, perhaps consider how you can bring them into your businesses or into your supply chains in areas in addition to production, because the production bit may be something they're not that comfortable going into. It's very hard to convince my kids that a career working in a factory is right for them, but perhaps industrial design, where they can also contribute heavily to manufacturing, is something that might be more interested in. And I think that's going to be a challenge as we go through the generational changes of manufacturing. When it comes specifically to SMEs, I want to share with you a chart that was published a couple of months ago. And you may not be able to see the small print of it, but the message behind it is that in each of the priority areas of the economy, small and medium businesses make up at least 98, and in some cases 99% of the businesses in each of those priority areas. That was a pretty fundamental thing for me to realize. I think it's something we know, and we've always felt, and you hear some dimensions around. But actually seeing the data that says, if we are going to shift these industry forward and contribute to growing Australia's economy, the responsibility fundamentally has to lie with small and medium businesses. And governments and trade associations and local councils and local organizations can do their best to catalyze and to accelerate that journey. But fundamentally, coming from the world of SMEs, I've always seen the difference between those that get up in the bed and say, I'm going to make a difference and I can and will do this, versus those that are a bit more comfortable in their businesses and don't want to take this on board. We need to stimulate those. There's a constant phrase within government about, and outside of government about, is it about picking winners? I think there was a phrase I heard, it's about picking those who are willing and have the ambition to innovate and grow their businesses. And I think that's quite a distinct separation from the world of picking winners. We also, unfortunately, and this is a statistic which I'd love to see arrested, is that when you compare ourselves with the OECD countries, we sit 26th of 34 in terms of new to market innovation. And so I think I get the sense when I talk to businesses, there's a little bit of confusion about what is the difference between improvement and innovation. And new to market, to me, is always the test. What could you do that is new to market, maybe new to the world even, as a fantastic opportunity? And that's where I see the SME innovation system most active. We do have, and I'm just going to touch on a selection of programs. Apologies, the formatting of the font's obviously gone a bit astray. One of the programs I have primary responsibility for is a new program called the Industry Growth Program. Opened in November last year, and predominantly this is a program that is designed to provide advisory services to SMEs who have an innovative product, process, or service they want to take to market. So it's not designed, and I make no apologies, to support companies around things like continuous improvement. It's not designed for things like capacity building. It's looking for companies that can design and take and commercialize and grow through new products and markets. And for those companies that do apply, they get an advisor. We've got advisors around the country who can support SMEs anywhere in the country. And those advisors will partner up with a company and take them through a discovery journey to pressure test their business model and look at their commercialization and growth plans. Once a company has been through that program and they get their report, they would then be eligible, should they choose, to apply for a grant. And within the Interest Growth Program, we will be opening up a grant program later this year that will allow SMEs to apply for match cash funding of from $50,000 up to $5 million. So it is a sizable fund, but it will be available for those that have the best proposals effectively in terms of future growth opportunities for them, contribution to the growth of Australian manufacturing capability, and contribution to one of those priority areas. We have a number of other programs. I'm sure you've all heard of the National Reconstruction Fund, a $15 billion program, again, very much in the priority areas. This is not a granting program. It is about loans, guarantees, and equities. I know we're all waiting to see what the first round of investments are that the NRF will make, and that will all give us a very good idea of the types of programs and the types of investment and the types of business they're willing to support. But if you haven't heard of the NRF, jump on a website and get involved, because it may be something that is useful for you. We've also got things like cooperative research centres. They come and go. I managed the manufacturing CRC for a number of years, but we have CRC projects, and these are designed for collaboration between industry and universities. We still sit at only a handful of businesses in Australia actually partner up with universities, but I consistently saw where you can get some chemistry right and get the relationships going. I saw businesses leapfrog into the future by engaging with universities in the CSIRO. It may be hard work to do. It may be a different culture and a different language, but I've seen tremendous outcomes. So if you get an opportunity and you want to see how new technology can maybe apply to you, even around digitalization, automation, go and find your local university, and I'm sure they'll be able to help. We also have within Oz Industry, and I must admit, until I came to the government, I wasn't aware of the scale of this. We have 30 regional managers dotted around the country who are designed to engage and partner with businesses. And they're also designed to help you find pathways for government support programs, be that training, be that grants, be that other opportunities. Many of you may be involved in the R&D tax incentive. That remains one of the most successful supporting mechanisms the Australian government has. If you're not involved in it, then go and have a look. There's also one other I just want to flag to you, which is a Department of Education program called Australia's Economic Accelerator. It's designed to support universities with research, but fundamentally, all of the funding that goes to the universities are obligated to find an industry partner to help them commercialize this research. So there's a little bit of a matchmaking to be done, because you may all have problems in your businesses you want to look at resolving. The universities may be looking to resolve some of those problems, and it's how we connect businesses and universities together. And that process will outline, but that's a Department of Education program. I guess what I'd just like to do, and I know that managing an SME, managing a business, only gets more and more complicated each year. There are broad themes such as digitalization. You're all hearing about net zero and so on and wondering what it means for you. I guess I just want to finish off by, again, with no apologies, I want to make your thinking a little bit more complicated. But what I want to throw out to you is a bit of a challenge. And as I talk very briefly about each of these themes, what are you doing about them, all right? Are they in your consideration? Are you talking about them? Are you finding partnerships? Are you investing? Are you leading the pack? You may not find all of these relevant to you, but I'm pretty convinced that if these are not in your thinking, you may be missing some tricks in terms of how you could grow as a business. So where are you today? And more importantly, where could you be and in what time frame? Because I can't tell you where that's right for your business, only you'll know that. So what is it you need to be thinking about? Well, I think one of the biggest capabilities I'd like to see being built here in manufacturing is the ability to design and the ability to do development, all right? Now, we often talk about R&D. I like the concept of design and development. Those companies that I think did really well and pivoted, if I can use that word, during COVID, had two fundamental characteristics as I saw them. One was they had the capability to design, all right? They were already designing products and services and processes themselves. So the ability to redesign something new during COVID was what they did. The second thing they collaborated. They had partnerships they could tap into very quickly, right? And if you're not engaged in those two, when times get really tough again, what do you have to fall back on, all right? Because there may not be a JobKeeper kind of mechanism next time round. And so for me, the design and development characteristic is if I had a magic wand, that's what I'd love to put fairy dust across manufacturing. That's where I'd love to see us attract talent, because if we can do that, we will make and produce so much more in this country than we do today. Many of you are on your Industry 4.0 or your digitalization journey, your automation, and I capture within that artificial intelligence, all right? If you're not, find people here today you can talk to. But this is the solution, not just for things like productivity. I think you'll find when you get into the world of things like net zero, sustainability, reporting requirements, this will provide you with the data that you need to start building your plans about how you report, not just for yourselves, but what are your suppliers doing and what your customer expectations are in your reporting, and what are you doing if you're exporting to markets like Europe or the UK, because the whole world is changing in this place. We need a big focus on reducing emissions, but to me, we also need a big focus on reducing waste generally, all right? Emissions to me is just another form of waste. And so coming from the automotive industry, my training in things like lean manufacturing was all about waste reduction and efficiency optimization. So I see net zero as actually just the next generation of that. And that leads me to things like sustainability. You know, how many of you are genuinely involved in understanding what happens with your product or your equipment at the end of its life? What could you do with it? What solutions or problems are you solving? How are you attracting young talents into your business when actually you don't have answers to your role in terms of your responsibility to the environment? So this is a big theme coming, and there are business opportunities in this today because things have changed in terms of what we can and cannot do around exporting our waste products out of the country. It's a problem we have to solve, and there's an opportunity there. I think during COVID, we realized that resilient and local supply chains, many of us did look to find local suppliers. Unfortunately, I've sensed in some industries that cost is now the primary method, and we've gone back to buying stuff from overseas or keeping extra warehouses of safety stock. But for those that have stuck with the local suppliers, I think they've found great partnerships. They've found relationships. They've found partners for innovation, for design, for sharing a problem and sharing risk and opportunities. So I would encourage everyone to keep looking at how we build that resilient local supply chain. Normally, there is a tipping point, which comes down to a business case or return on investment, that I would need to make this much. That's one of the things we're looking at in terms of manufacturing solar panels. Which are the products in the solar panel supply chain that if you were to build here, you might create a critical mass to then trigger another industry? When I was working in the glass industry, we only had one glass float here, all right, which meant most of the glass was imported overseas. Now, if we're going to significantly step up making solar panels, do we actually reach a tipping point where we can afford more glass floats, and that provides competitiveness for all sorts of other industry, including the building industry? So that's where these resilient and local supply chains, I think, make a big difference. And the SMEs, you are the ones that are startups and growing and building your own supply chains as you grow your businesses. And that's where I think the opportunity is. Coming from the world of manufacturing, the words IP always used to bemuse me a bit, because my way of managing IP was don't let anyone into your factory or always be the first to market. But that said, I absolutely get that you need to protect designs, you may need to protect trademarks. If you're in the medtech space, the software space, whatever, IP is now an increasingly important part. It is a way of defining that you have uniqueness, newness, and innovation. So I encourage companies now to think deeply and get some help on what is your IP strategy, all right? How are you managing data, all right? How are you defining your uniqueness of business? And within that, how are you making yourselves more attractive and investable to employees and to the finances? You've probably all heard of this concept before about building services. It's a theme that's not going to go away. Technologies like IoT have only made it more and more possible. But service expansion, now I'm not talking about closing a factory and becoming a design house, all right? I'm talking about building design capability enabled by the products you make. So when I think of that broad spectrum of manufacturing, I think that it's production that enables it, but I do recognize that we can't make everything here in Australia, and nor probably should we try to at the end of the day. But it's about building services beyond that, and it's also about creating data platforms at the end of the day that you can build out of data that you gather. And finally, in terms of the what to think about, how do you build complexity in what you do, all right? Can you assemble more products? Can you make more products? Can you provide more services? How can you measure your proportion of value add? Is it per capita? Is it per machine? Is it per unit? Is it per delivery? And how can you ensure you're doing this with a lens on global opportunities? All right, because we're very good here at looking at local opportunities, but actually our competition primarily is not the factory next door, it's the factory in Asia, all right, or the factory in America. And we are seeing the governments around the world put substantial money into those facilities. So then I think of the next thing is not just the what, but the why. What's in your heads? What's motivating you as an SME? And how would you do it? And with who, all right? Because you don't have to do it all yourselves. I'd love to see us invest more in leadership and management capability. It was something I was very passionate about through the CRC that I ran, that we often talk about workforce development from the ground up. But actually, leaders and owners of SMEs, when was the last time you were able to go and get yourself trained up, immersed in something, through a program that significantly increased your awareness, right? And that's an area which I think SMEs need to work much harder at themselves and find time to do it. It's about design thinking, not just design as an activity, but being very, very purposeful of who is the customer, who's the consumer, and what problem you're looking to solve. But good business practice. So what is the return on the investment that you're going to get out of making this process? It is about innovation as well as continuous improvement, all right? But it's how you can find those breakthrough ideas and who you can find them in. And what is your opportunity to create newness to market? It's about your workforce talent. That, I think, is going to be one of the biggest challenges over the next 5 to 10 years. It's a challenge for many of you today. It's not going to go away. And migrancy is not going to solve all the problems because it may not bring the skill sets that many of you need for your business. So it's about succession planning. It's about skills. But I also think it's about diversity. Diversity of workforce and diversity of thinking. All right? We all live also in a world of risk. All right, so when was the last time you sat back and said, do I have a risk statement? Do I have a board? What is their risk appetite? How can I describe this? What are we prepared to do in what period of time? And test your ambition as to where you can go with your business. All right, it's an interesting exercise. Get on a whiteboard. Define what you believe is risk and what is acceptable risk to you. And maybe that might just a way of stretching your thinking a little bit. Collaboration and partnerships. All right, a problem halved is a problem shared. When it comes to risk management opportunities, you only know what you know inside your business today. And I found when I have stepped into businesses, 3 or 4 months into that business, you actually become quite closed off to the outside world and quickly get disconnected. So by the time you've been in a business 3 or 4 years, through no fault of your own, you only know what you know in your business. And actually with a fast-moving world, you might find that it's now time to get up and meet other people and come to shows like this. And that brings me to 2 final things that I think are critical. One is the ability to manage change. We all went through this in COVID. It was all a little bit reactive. Our change management skills are better because of something like COVID, but it's something I think we need to be incredibly fit and capable of doing, all right, and building cultures that we can move quickly and with agility in our businesses. The final thing is, as you think through this, which of these apply to your business? Which of these are you thinking of today? How can you become more commercially active? How often do you bring new products, processes, or services to market? How often do you think about your marketing strategy or how you're recruiting people? And what is it that you are doing to make yourself both more attractive and more investable? All right. And I say this now sitting in the side of government. I'm now looking at this at SMEs as who are those that are good investments to make? Who are attractive because they are thinking about these things, all right? They're thinking about uniqueness. So the challenge to you today, all right, is to think about what of those are you doing today, if any, and hopefully you tick more than 1 or 2, and what of those could you be doing? And maybe when you get back to your teams, just pull them together and say, hey, maybe we just need to have think differently. If you have all of that in hand and you think about all that, you are super people, super businesses, and I wish you the best of luck. I have to be very honest, running a business before I came into this job, my biggest challenge was being time poor. And I knew this was all the stuff I'd love to do, but how can you do everything at once? So at the end of the day, it is about finding opportunities and picking the right ones that work for your business, your people, your customers, and solving their problems and building a business for the future. If you'd like to find out a little bit more about what Oz Industry does generally, some of that data I showed you earlier, graphs, subscribe to the Oz Industry updates, find out what's happening across manufacturing and other industries so you can see these trends, understand where your nearest regional manager is. If you'd like to find more about the Industry Growth Program for SMEs that are bringing innovative products, processes and services to market, needs some support with doing that, leave the QR code up there. I've probably run out of time, but I'm happy to hang around for a few minutes afterwards. If there are any questions, just come and say hello. Thank you again for coming today, and I hope that's been stimulated a little bit of thinking for you to take back to your businesses, and I wish you well for the rest of the show. Thank you.
It is over.